My second video that I uploaded on this channel was all about the best fiction tools for writers, and in this video I already have to update that. That was only a few months ago. So much happens in the world of AI that I just have to put out videos like this periodically with updated information. So in this video I'm going to give you the 5 best AI tools for fiction, and believe me, I have tried so many of them, and I've tried a lot of other tools that say that they can do fiction, but really they're just trying to beef up their list of features, and what they give you is not good at all. I've tried so many of these types of tools. Most are garbage. And so with that in mind, I've narrowed it down to 5 tools with one honorable mention that is looking promising. Let's start with number 1. First on my list is Sudowrite. Now in my first video, the first time I did this video, I mentioned Sudowrite, but it wasn't at the top of my list because it has a pricing structure where they only give you, for $30 a month, they give you 90,000 words that it is very easy to burn right through. And at the time, I said better to invest in something like ChatGPT, which is $20 a month and essentially gives you unlimited words. However, shortly after I made that video, Sudowrite went and created Story Engine, which you can see right here. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but this is an absolute game changer of being able to write books from scratch using AI and do so in a very structured way that allows you to get a lot of words written. My biggest hang-up using other AI bots like ChatGPT or Claude is that you really have to do it in shorter chunks, and there isn't a great way to get large blocks of text based off of your summaries. And Story Engine solved that problem. Now, it's not perfect, but the thing I will say about Sudowrite, even though they do have that pricing structure, which isn't my favorite, but I understand why they do it, it is, of all the ones on this list, the one that is paying the most attention to authors. What I mean by that is everything here, I can come here, I can say rewrite, for example, and then there are different ways to rewrite this paragraph, but I could select show not tell, right? And that's clearly some lingo that only writers would really understand or need. And it's a common one, or you can add more inner conflict or make it more intense. And there's certainly a lot that you could do. You could also customize it to make it your own. There is so much you can do with this. And it is all very, very well targeted at fiction authors like you and me. And so as a whole, Sudowrite, while it still has that pricing structure that I don't really care for, it is still, right now, I would say my number one all-in-one platform for authors. Now, I do think there are definitely some redeeming qualities about some of the ones I'm about to show you, and actually I would pair Sudowrite with something else, which I'll get to later. Be sure to stick around to the end, so I'll give you my ideal scenario, as well as what I would do if I could only pick one tool, and I'll get to that at the end. But for this, I'd say Sudowrite as a whole is still one of the best tools out there for fiction authors who want to write using AI, because it is so geared towards writers and it really helps to walk you through the whole process so that you don't have to become a certified prompt engineer or anything in order to write well. The second one on my list should come as no surprise, and that is ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT, of course, it's been around, well, it's been in the public spotlight for longer than most of these, and that's for a reason. ChatGPT was the first one to really come on the scene and say, wow, this is really cool. And of course you have the chat where you can ask it to do anything, and it's very versatile. The thing that I have since discovered, since I've made this video originally about ChatGPT, is it has a couple of strengths and a couple of weaknesses. Its biggest strength is its ability to follow directions. It's usually the best one at sticking to a prescribed structure if you have one. And it is also the best at structuring the output the way you want. It's really good at data analysis and things like that. The downsides to ChatGPT is that the prose tends to be a lot more flowery, which is a turnoff for some people. But if you're not using it for pros, then that's not an issue for you. In fact, if you're not using it for pros, ChatGPT might be the one you want to use because it's really good at brainstorming. It's really good at structure. If you're trying to use it for outlining, it's really good for that. So that is what I would use in those particular situations. But ChatGPT is a really great option and one that I highly recommend. If you have the money to invest in ChatGPT Plus, more power to you, because GPT-4 is so much better than GPT 3.5, which you only get in the free version. Now, coming right next to that is OpenAI's Playground. Now, I get a lot of confusion around this because there is a lot of similarities between OpenAI's Playground and ChatGPT. And in fact, they are the same company. They're running the same models. If you go over here, I can select GPT-4 or I can select GPT 3.5. There's different things you can do. We're in a chat mode right now, so I can essentially chat with it in the exact same way I would ChatGPT. But as with everything on this list, there are pros and cons to this. The biggest pros, the reason I think people are still using OpenAI's Playground is for this system box here. It's at least one of the biggest reasons. ChatGPT does have the ability, I'll show you going back to ChatGPT, if you go to custom instructions, you can input custom style information here, and then it will remember that as long as you are writing with that style. And you can do something similar here in this system box. The only difference and the advantage that OpenAI Playground has is that this system box doesn't have a character limit on it. And so you can get many more words in here than you could in ChatGPT, and it will remember that information. So you could put your entire synopsis in there or an entire outline or what have you. Now, there are limits, of course, because there are limits to what the model itself can handle. So if you put in a whole novel in here, it wouldn't be able to understand what that is. But it can do a lot more here than what ChatGPT can do, which is my point. The other thing that you can do in Playground that you can't do in ChatGPT is mess with some of these settings. Now, really the only ones that you need to mess with here are maximum length. This shows you just like how far your context window is. So the higher this is, the more it can understand. And then temperature. Temperature is basically the ability of the model to get more random, which often results in more creativity. There are going to be times where you want it to be more creative and times when you want it to stick to the instructions a little more. If you want it to stick to the instructions, you bring the temperature down. If you want it to be more creative and try a bunch of different things, you can bring it up. So for instance, brainstorming, you might want to make it even higher. Things like that. And so if you are technically inclined, you can play around with these a lot more and get different results as a result. Other than that, though, there isn't much of a difference. And while I probably am missing out on a few things, I personally just default to ChatGPT more than I default to OpenAI Playground. ChatGPT does have a few things that Playground doesn't, including code interpreter, for example, something that you can't do here in Playground. That's something to keep in mind. Next is Claude. Now, Claude is the recent one here. Now, a Claude model has existed for a while, but it hasn't really been that accessible until recently when Anthropic, the founding business behind Claude, announced Claude 2, and they made this whole chat interface similar to ChatGPT so that people could interact with Claude 2. And it had a whole bunch of cool advantages over ChatGPT, especially when it was first announced, like the ability to add files here, which you can now do in ChatGPT using Code Interpreter. But the really important thing about Claude, two things. One is it has a 100,000 token context window, which means it can remember a lot of words. So if you have a really long conversation, it will be able to think all the way back to the beginning of that conversation. Or, and more important for authors, you can put your entire book there, or most of it, depending on how long it is. It can take about 65 to 75,000 words. Put the whole book in there, then ask it questions like, summarize this character's arc, or give me information about this person, summarize this person's physical description, or give me marketing materials for this book. Give me quotes from the book that would make, good marketing material. All kinds of things that you can do. And this is, I think, what makes Claude one of the biggest powerhouses on this list, because it can do a whole lot of things that you might want it to do. The downside to Claude is that it's a downside and an upside. It is very creative. And as a result, it is not as good at following orders as ChatGPT is. However, because of this, it tends to be much better at prose and at a lot of other things. Like if you ask it for headlines or book descriptions, it tends to be a little bit better. The language just seems a little more natural than ChatGPT by comparison. And so one of the best, if not the best option on this list is Claude. Even though it's not made for authors like Sudowrite is, it is by far the most useful chatbot for authors, if you're asking me. All right, moving on to number 5. And the last main item on this list, we have Verb.ai. Now, Verb is a really interesting platform, and it's not as good as all of these others, but I like to bring it up because Verb is really good for discovery writing. So let's say you don't have an outline planned, you don't want to have an outline planned, you can just go to the end of your novel and you give it a / command where you say describe. Then you can just input what you think happens next. You can say Cernunnos hops up and down like a bunny and does a little dance. Not what actually happens in the book, but now it'll give you a continuation of the story, usually in 100 to 150 word chunks. And then you just move one at a time through here. And so I found this is a really good solution for discovery writers who are unsure what to do. And then you have options to change the style, to reword it, to shorten, to expand. There are a couple of things it can do. It is also a very nice, clean interface and not as good and packed full of features as Sudowrite, but it is one like Sudowrite that is built specifically with authors in mind. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It also has the ability to track your characters, so you can input your characters here. So for instance, Una, it tells me she's got 632 mentions throughout the book. I can add a brief description of her here, and I could add, for instance, information about what she sounds like, how she talks, and then it will keep that information in mind and use it in the text here as it is going along. And so a very useful tool, and I think the workflow specifically, how people use it, how people actually write with AI will differ from person to person. But if you're the kind of person that really likes to go just linearly, one little tiny chunk at a time, this is the one I would look at. But if you like to do things in like a big outline overall and then put that outline into the AI and have it just write the whole thing for you, then I would look at Sudowrite instead. All right, one honorable mention, and then I'll talk about my ideal pairing for writing fiction with AI. And the honorable mention is Novel AI. I did a review about Novel AI a little while ago, and I was pretty harsh on it. And I still stand by everything I said in that video. However, my main reason for being really hard on it, you didn't have the ability to prompt it to get results. And I understand they are currently working on a beta feature where you can now do that. And so once that is a little bit more integrated and out of beta, I plan to revisit it and give my thoughts on it. The one thing I know about Novel AI that I know people like is that it is the best model. They have their own model for creating not safe for work content. So if you write erotica, then you might want to, even if you use another program, you might want to bring it over to this one temporarily so you can write those little bits for you and then transfer it back into whatever other tool you have. Now, Sudowrite can do that too, but since Sudowrite is using GPT-4 and Claude under the hood, it can sometimes run into some roadblocks with all of the restrictions that those models have. And so Novel AI doesn't have any of those restrictions, and so it can be a really good option for that if that's something you need. But as of right now, it's still lacking a couple of features that I feel are necessary in order to even make this list. So I will be talking more about them in the future as they are rolling out their new prompt features. Another honorable mention I wanted to bring up was Poe.com, and this is not a specific language model, but it is a way to access multiple of the other language models. So you can access Claude here, you can access Claude 2, and for some people who don't have access to ChatGPT or to Claude otherwise, or want it all in one place, Poe is a good way to go. There are restrictions on how many chats you can do depending on your subscription. I believe it's $20 a month for basic access, but it does give you access to a whole lot of different models, including Google's Palm, which is what Google uses for Bard. You also have access to the GPT-432K model, which is something that that you can't access in many other places. And then of course you have all of the other models that we've talked about, Claude 2, GPT-4, all of those are available here, ChatGPT. And so something to check out for sure if you want everything in one place and want to play around with different models without really having to pull up to have like 4 different subscriptions, this would be where to go. All right, so let's talk about my ideal scenario here. Obviously, if you have a lot of money, the ideal scenario is to have all of these tools for different situations. I would say especially Sudowrite, Claude, and ChatGPT. However, if you are strapped for cash, which I feel like most people are to some degree, and you could only have one, I would say Claude is the one that you should do, not Sudowrite. And the reason for this is because Claude is, as of today, it is free for people in the US or the UK. Now you can, I believe, access it outside of the US and the UK if you use a VPN, but it is only in those areas, but it is currently free. And so I would say take full advantage of that. It is also, I believe, the best one for prose, and the language is very natural sounding, which is important for an author. And so if I could only have one, that's the one I would pick. The ideal pairing, however, I believe, is using a combination of Sudowrite with a chatbot. That chatbot could be either Claude or ChatGPT. There are the pros and cons of each that I've discussed so far can help you with that decision. But Sudowrite, I believe, is still very powerful. And the way I use AI, I use Sudowrite for generating the finished prose, and I use it for editing the prose. I do not use it for anything else. I don't use it for creating characters or brainstorming. I do not use it for my outlines. All of that, I use a separate model, either Claude or ChatGPT, and I do feel like that is the best way to go about it because you can get into a really good rhythm of brainstorming with ChatGPT or with Claude. And if you were to do that in Sudowrite, you would run out of words really, really fast. And so in an effort to be economical with the words that I'm given in Sudowrite, I will use ChatGPT or Claude whenever possible. And then I will take those words, fix them up how I like, and put them into Sudowrite to inform the prose that I write. And so that is my ideal scenario. Use a chatbot together with Sudowrite, and I think that is the best way to go writing fiction with AI. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.